Welcome to The Explainer. So, today we're going to unpack an existential dilemma that honestly almost all of us experience, but we rarely ever talk about out loud. It's that silent, humming exhaustion of modern life. You know the exact feeling I'm talking about. Like you somehow need to perform, even when you're just picking out a tomato at the grocery store or sitting totally by yourself in your car. We are talking about the invisible audience. It's that persistent, quiet feeling that you're constantly on stage, even when nobody is around. It's a fascinating, deeply relatable psychological trap, and we're going to break down exactly why it happens, where it comes from, and how it absolutely alters the way we live our everyday lives. I mean, have you ever noticed that sometimes you aren't actually living your life anymore? You're just watching yourself live it. Think about it for a second. You're smiling, but part of you is quietly monitoring exactly how attractive that smile looks right now. You're deep in conversation, but another part of your brain is actively evaluating, am I being interesting enough right now? You fall in love, but secretly you're measuring, how important am I to this person? You post a photo online, and suddenly your nervous system just kind of freezes, waiting for proof that you exist through likes and attention and validation. Without even realizing it, you've become both the performer and the audience. Okay, let's dive into this. It turns out there's actually a clinical name for this phenomenon: self-identification. Now, most of us naturally assume our identity comes from within, right? Like from our core personality. But psychologically, I was totally surprised to learn that's often just not true. Many of us unconsciously build our identity through external reflection. We use attention, admiration, achievements, and desirability as mirrors. So in simple terms, we start defining who we are entirely through how other people respond to us. And slowly, the self becomes something we perform, rather than something we directly experience. It is literally one of the deepest, most exhausting problems of modern life. So let's look at the roots of this performance and how exactly we learned to be an audience in the first place. You see, defining ourselves through other people's responses isn't just some byproduct of having a smartphone. It actually starts way, way earlier in childhood than we might think. Psychoanalyst Alice Miller explains this brilliantly in her work, The Drama of the Gifted Child. She shows how a lot of children survive emotionally by adapting to the emotional needs of the adults around them. The child learns pretty quickly that being easy keeps the love flowing, that being successful, well, that gets approval, that being immensely useful prevents rejection, and that hiding their true kind of messy emotions is what maintains their attachment to their caregivers. The child isn't doing this maliciously, They're simply trying to survive, and they do it by seamlessly molding themselves to their environment. And what's really interesting about this is how a profound internal shift takes place because of those adaptations. Eventually, the child completely stops asking, "What do I truly feel?" and they replace it entirely with the question, "Who do I need to become to stay loved?" That right there is the exact moment of self-identification. The nervous system literally detaches from genuine internal emotion and attaches identity completely to an external response. Alice Miller wrote something about this whole process that is just, wow, it's profound. She said, "What is tragic is not the oppression itself, but the fact that at a later stage, the child no longer notices anything wrong with it." That line is terrifying, isn't it? It means that eventually this massive, lifelong performance just starts to feel like our actual self. The performance becomes so ingrained, so fundamentally automatic, that we don't even realize we're putting on a show anymore. We just think it's who we are. All right, moving into our next area, the social media mirror and how we end up becoming objects in our own minds. And this brilliantly illustrates the shift, because if this psychological dynamic was already happening in our childhoods, modern social media has absolutely put it on hyperspeed. People don't really just experience life anymore. They experience themselves being perceived. I mean, we've all seen it or done it, right? Treating a perfectly nice dinner out like a highly coordinated photo shoot. A gorgeous sunset just instantly becomes content for a feed. A private, intimate relationship turns into a public emotional status update. Success becomes a whole identity. Beauty literally becomes a tool for social survival. And maybe most ironically of all, even our deepest, most painful vulnerabilities are so often packaged up into this neat, digestible performance for an audience. We become entirely consumed by one single question: how does my life appear? And we totally lose touch with asking, what does my life actually feel like? When you live your entire life filtering it through the lens of a camera or the imagined judgment of a crowd, slowly but surely you turn into an object inside your own consciousness. You quite literally become a PR manager for an avatar, rather than a living, breathing human being who gets to just experience their own life. Which brings us to scanning for worth and how we are surviving through perception. So, what actually happens to us when our identity becomes completely dependent on being desired? Well, there's this really haunting Korean film called Paradise that nails this exact question. The whole movie is dripping with beauty, desire, status, and emotional fantasy. But underneath all of that aesthetic perfection is a really grim psychological reality for the characters. Because they aren't just searching for love, they are desperately searching for emotional confirmation of their existence. Being chosen becomes their self-worth. Being seen becomes their identity. And honestly, that is exactly what modern culture trains people to do. It trains us to emotionally survive entirely through perception. So, the crucial point is the science behind why this takes such a massive toll on us. When I looked into the biology, I found Stephen Porges' polyvagal theory. It's this fascinating psychological framework that explains how our nervous system evolved to constantly scan the environment for physical safety and danger. Thousands of years ago, this is exactly how we stayed alive. Our bodies were always on the lookout for a tiger in the bushes or some physical threat in our surroundings. But today, our modern nervous systems are scanning for something else entirely. We are scanning for worth. We walk into a room or we open an app and our subconscious instantly asks, am I attracted enough? Am I desired? Am I visible right now, or am I totally replaceable? And because our nervous systems are perpetually locked in this exhausting, high-alert state of scanning for social survival, we just completely burn out. Eventually, one self is living, while another self sits back and endlessly critiques the performance. That is why so many people feel deeply, profoundly disconnected from themselves. Because we became absolute experts at managing perception way before we ever learned how to simply exist. Finally, let's talk about returning to the self and escaping that audience once and for all. Perhaps the real tragedy of modern life isn't that we're unloved, but that we slowly forget how to exist without turning ourselves into an object first. So how do we actually fix this? How do we heal? Well, first, we have to consciously, actively stop asking, how am I being seen? Second, we have to recognize and escape that invisible audience judging us in our minds, those internalized critics, the imagined followers, all those ghosts of expectations past. And third, we have to relearn how to just exist. Because true freedom, it isn't about becoming the most admired person in the room. Real freedom is finally breaking out of the performance. It's dropping the script entirely. Healing really begins the very moment we change the question we ask ourselves. So I want to leave you with this. The next time you find yourself performing, the next time you feel that invisible audience watching your every move, stop. Just take a breath and ask yourself, what does my life actually feel like from inside my own body? Let that sit with you for a bit. It changes everything. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. I hope it brought you some clarity today, and I challenge you to step off the stage, drop the act, and simply feel your life.